A reading from the Wisdom of Solomon. God did not make death, and he does not delight in the death of the living. For he created all things so that they might exist. The generative forces of the world are wholesome, and there is no destructive poison in them. And the dominion of Hades is not on earth, for righteousness is immortal. God created us for incorruption, and made us in the image of his own eternity. And through the devil's envy, death entered the world, and those who belong to his company experience it. God did not make death, and he does not delight in the death of the living, for he created all things so that they might exist. If God did not make death, and if God does not delight in the death of the living, why then, I'm compelled to ask, do we have death? Now bear with me. This sermon isn't bold enough to answer that really big question, but it does offer three rather different responses to the question of why we have death. One from the perspective of science, another from a deeply personal point of view, and a third from a transformational angle. Lately, I've been listening to conversations with the theoretical physicist Sarah Walker, who studies astrobiology and whose work is centered on the origins of life. She has a new book coming out called Life as No One Knows It: The Physics of Life's Emergence. She poses the question of whether life can be described solely in terms of matter and physical things, or whether there might be some other feature that's not physical that animates living things, what might be called a soul. She writes, if you trace back in time far enough, every living thing on this planet shares a single memory. To put it another way, every living thing has always existed, and no living thing has ever ceased to exist. She looks at life as dynamic, a constant birth and death process, a process through which the universe can explore what is possible. The world is vibrant and creative because of death. She says, death is a way to make room in the universe for other things to exist that wouldn't be able to exist otherwise. And now a story. I already wasn't entirely a stranger to death. My great-grandmother, her parched skin and thin hair as white as the sheets tucked in around her bed at the nursing home, already seemed of another world long before she ceased to breathe. So her death, somehow, seemed okay. But as a young boy, I just cherished nothing more than the Welsh pony, Princess, that my parents had given me for my 11th birthday. I spent my childhood astride this little mare. Imagine myself more Indian than cowboy. I rode bareback, my legs wrapped tightly around her belly and my left hand firmly grasping a hank of flowing mane. Only in the latter days of her pregnancy, she had mated with a true Indian pony, a leopard-spotted Appaloosa stallion. Did I then allow her a break from her near incessant galloping through the plains and woods of the Cross Timbers region of Texas, where we lived? Even after her foal was born, we rode on, her little filly nimbly trailing along behind us. I was so grateful for the gift of a pony that I never complained about the work it took to care for a horse, or neglected the other chores required on a working farm with cattle, pigs, and chickens. However, as conscientious as I usually was, one cold winter evening, I was careless in the execution of my chores and left the gate to the pig pen unlocked. The pigs were being fattened for slaughter and had an endless supply of grain from an automated feeder to feast on. Now, pigs are smart and know how not to overeat. A horse, however, can't tell when she's eating too much. And so it was that evening that my little mare pushed open the door to the pig pen, and throughout the night gorged on the too rich grain from the pig's trough. Her belly swelled to an enormous size, and we called the vet, who did his best to save her. Yet when I woke the next morning and anxiously walked to the pasture below our house, I found my little mare lying in the grass, still and lifeless. My grief was unbounded. I dropped to my knees, clutched her now scruffy mane in my left hand, and buried my face in the crook of her neck. I have never wailed as mightily as I wailed that terrible morning, gasping for breath. Amid my incessant sobs, I inhaled a scent of sweat-infused horse flesh that still indelibly etched in my memory. As I've grown older, I've known other losses, but I'm not sure any pain cut more deeply. A hollow place in my heart remains for that little Welsh mare. I know it's not always the case that that which is lost is always restored, at least not on this side of the grave. However, I'd be remiss if I didn't call to mind that on that dark morning, when I discovered my little mare lying lifeless atop a crumpled patch of brown winter grass, she wasn't alone. Her foal, the year-old filly that followed alongside us on every ride, stood perplexed and impatiently waiting for her mother to rise from her repose. In a year's time, that filly, marked by her mother's sweet disposition and her father's gift of a blanket of leopard spots astride her hips, became my new companion. Now, with a pony that would make any Apache proud, I felt more Indian than cowboy than I'd ever felt before, and understood that that which is lost might, in fact, be found. And 3, the interspiritual teacher, Mirabai, Star, lost a young daughter in an accident years ago and founded an online grief community called Holy Lament, the transformative path of loss and longing. She wisely notes that the grief process is more about transformation than about consolation, noting that there are many places you can go to feel better. But grief is not a problem to be solved or a malady to be cured. It's a sacred reality to be entered. We've all experienced death and loss of various kinds. It's an essential part of the human condition, and the world wants us to get over it, to move on. Instead, I suggest that the pathway to the divine that is opened by the experience of profound loss is transformative, is soul-making, and without any effort diminish the pain that accompanies the death of someone you love, the failure of a relationship, the onset of a serious illness. Without you choosing this most unwelcome path, you may be led to a more meaningful encounter with the sacred than you could have ever imagined. Amen.